Dynasty, starring Blue 24, Nora, Glesney, and Mr Rutland.
It really is, without doubt, Mr Rutland who plays the leading role in this story. He's the head of an impressive family and has created quite a dynasty.
His UK residence is on the top of an oak tree at Rutland Water near Leicester. It's from here that he's built his empire. But like so many soap operas, this self-made bird has humble origins. In the 1950s, ospreys were all but extinct in Britain, except for one pair in Scotland that became the star characters of a successful protection programme. By the late 90s, it was decided to bring the osprey back to England, and Mr Rutland was one of the first chicks to be reintroduced. Back then, Tim McCrill was a 15-year-old volunteer, and he's been watching Mr Rutland ever since. The nest is on private land and protected, so we can't get too close.
He's been nesting here since 2001, so he was the first osprey that we translocated to Rutland Water who came back and bred successfully, and he's still going strong 15 summers later.
That's incredible, isn't it? He's 18 now, isn't he?
That's right, yes.
Can I see him through the telescope?
Yeah, let's have a look. So he's sitting on the side of the nest with the female who's incubating the eggs.
Oh, yes, I can see them. He's sired goodness knows how many.
32 chicks, and his legacy goes much further than that. He's also grandfather to 43 birds, and then great-grandfather to another 15, so he's got this amazing dynasty.
So he's responsible for about 90 chicks.
Exactly, and it's fantastic, and the great thing is that those ospreys have come back, they've reared their own young, and the birds are spreading out across the country. They've spread across to Wales, as we know from Springwatch.
Glesney is his granddaughter?
Granddaughter, yep. Blue 24's another granddaughter, and then there's Nora, who bred at Dovey a couple of years ago. She's his daughter.
This really is an incredible bird, isn't it?
He's probably migrated in his lifetime something like 100,000 miles.
Oh, he's usually the first one back as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's normally back about the 16th, 17th of March, and that's really because young ospreys would much rather try and kick him off this nest than to go and find somewhere where they can build their own. So he knows he's got to get back here really early to defend it against those potential intruders.
Just a few weeks ago, in a dramatic twist to this soap opera plotline, Mr Rutland was challenged by two of his own grandsons, and the fight for his empire began.
So it all started off very serene and sedate. Basically, Mr Rutland came back, reclaimed his nest, as he does every spring. The female arrived and she laid eggs, so everything was fine. And then this is when you need to cue the dramatic music, because one of his grandsons, 51, arrived a few weeks later, and he set his sights on the nest, so he wanted that nest. And for the next few days, there was the most amazing aggression between the two birds at the nest. 51 would come in and literally knock Mr Rutland off the nest and chase him around nearby. And eventually, it looked like 51, who was the younger, fitter, stronger bird, had prevailed. Mr Rutland disappeared, and 51 tried to mate with the female. She, meanwhile, of course, was still incubating this clutch of eggs. And although she accepted his presence on the nest, she wouldn't let him mate with her. And that was quite telling, because, you know, clearly
That's the footage there, isn't it?
That's
you can
right.
see that she's just not interested. The tail's down, she's not interested.
This continued for a few days, and we thought that 51 had ousted Mr Rutland from the nest. But then everything changed. So this is when you need to cue dramatic music number 2. Another male arrived. This is another of his grandsons, and he knocked 51 off the nest. There was this incredible fight between the three birds.
Mr Rutland joins in the fight at this stage.
Yeah, he'd had time to recuperate, and he'd caught fish at the trout farm to regain his strength. And the fact that there was this second bird, we think, played into his hands, just gave him the opportunity to try and regain the nest. And eventually, to cut a long story short, it now looks like, as we've seen, Mr Rutland's prevailed.
Mr Rutland won!
There's life in the old dog yet, so let's not write him off quite yet.
I'm in love.
I mean, what a bird. What an incredible osprey. 18 years old. He's responsible for 90 chicks.
You go for fecundity, do you?
Well, yeah, I think I do.
You're only interested in one thing.
I mean, yeah, exactly. But let's just celebrate him before I give you an update on him.
OK.
Look, this is a photograph of him sent in by Jeff Harries. Look, I mean,
It's
he's
a good photo.
an impressive osprey,
Yeah.
isn't he?
Yeah, it's an impressive photo. It's very good, isn't it? There he is, grabbing a fish.
So now we've celebrated him, shall I give you the update? Which isn't actually great news, because him and his mate eventually abandoned that second clutch. They stopped incubating. And Tim was speculating that because of all of that fighting that he had to do to fight off the other males, the female wasn't being fed enough, so probably didn't have enough nutrients to produce a decent egg.
Or she might have laid, and then I guess she could have been needing to go to forage for herself. The eggs could have got chilled.
Could have been that as well, yeah.
Female body weight is what determines early success in the nest, whether she can lay enough eggs and then, of course, sit on them for, what, 35, nearly 40 days, probably in the case of an osprey.
It's a shame, though. I'm sure he'll be back next year.
You're a bit of an osprey strumpet, aren't you? To be an
I don't
osprey
know what
hussy.
you mean.
No, you are, darling. Because it was all Mr Rutland, Mr Rutland, Mr Rutland. You completely forgotten about Monty. It was Monty last year, wasn't it?
It was Monty last year. I mean, he's a handsome osprey, I have to say. You may remember he's the osprey that we've been following for the last couple of years on Spring Watch at the Dovey Osprey Project in Montgomeryshire in Wales. And this is his update. His is good news, actually, because he's managed to pair up again with Glesney, who, if you remember, is the granddaughter of Mr Rutland. She's part of that dynasty. She's the one with the blue tag sitting on the eggs. And look, you can see they've had 3 eggs. The last couple of years, they've only managed to produce 2. So that's really good news. And of course, you can follow the progress of that on the live cameras on their website, on the Dovey Osprey
Ospreys are
Project
doing pretty well at the moment, actually. Their numbers have been increasing since they first came back to breed here in the 1950s. We've got around 400 pairs, most of them in Scotland, some in the north of England, and obviously some in Wales as too, and the English population that you've fallen so head over heels in love with. So they're doing quite well. But some of our other species, as you know, are not, and one of them is the water vole. We've got